Institute, an affiliate of the James Q. Wilson Program in K-12 Education Studies. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on teaching with artificial intelligence. We're thrilled to have an incredible lineup of speakers with us today to explore one of the most pressing questions in education today. Can AI truly transform teaching? Let me start by setting the stage and with a confession. I'm an education technology skeptic, maybe close to a cynic. EdTech has a long and checkered history of overpromising and under-delivering. For decades, we've heard bold promises about how technology would revolutionize learning, only for many of those promises to fall short, or worse, fall into disrepute. Remember how digital natives with smartphones were going to lead a revolution in teaching? Well, now there's widespread talk of banning phones from schools and classrooms altogether. From interactive whiteboards to personalized learning platforms, the hype has reliably exceeded the reality. This gives us good reason to approach AI with a healthy dose of skepticism. Will it be another overhyped solution that doesn't quite deliver? Well, let's consider the flip side. We have nearly 4 million teachers in classrooms all across the United States. They face an immense workload in a job that is heavy cognitive lifting. For years, I've argued that we need to make teaching a sustainable profession, not for the idealized teacher we wish we had, but for the real teachers we actually do have. To do this, we need tools that can reduce burdens, enhance effectiveness, and enable teachers to focus on what matters most, their students. Could AI be one of those tools? Well, that's the question at the heart of today's discussion, and we could not have a better group to unpack it with us. Let's meet them. Armand Jaffer is the CEO of Brisk Teaching, a platform leveraging AI to enhance the quality and efficiency of instruction. Named one of Forbes 30 under 30 for his innovative contributions to education technology, Armand brings a wealth of experience, including his work at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Google, and elsewhere. Daisy Christodoulou is the director of education at No More Marking, a pioneer in online comparative judgment software. She's the author of several influential books, including the indispensable 7 Myths About Education. She brings deep insights into the intersection of technology and pedagogy. Alex Barron is the director of academic strategy at E.L. Haynes Public Charter School in Washington, D.C., with expertise spanning teaching, policy, research, and school redesign. Alex is uniquely positioned to share how AI might or might not support educators on the ground. And John Bailey is my colleague, a non-resident senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he focuses on AI education and workforce innovation. With a career spanning government, philanthropy, and private sector leadership, John offers a big picture perspective on the implications of AI for education and beyond. We'll dive into their unique perspectives, balancing the potential of AI to extend the capacities of teachers against the risks of repeating some of those past mistakes I mentioned. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Let's get started. I'll now turn it over to Armand Jaffer. He's going to walk us through the details and operations of Brisk. After Armand concludes, we'll open it up for a panel discussion and take questions from you in the audience in the final 10 minutes. Please send your questions via email to my colleague riley.fletcher@aei.org. Or if you're following on X, you can use the hashtag AEIEdTech. And with that, Armand Jaffer, get us started.
Great. Well, I am so excited to be here. I am actually at an EdTech conference in Orlando right now. So if you hear things in the background or see teachers just pop up in the background, that's who they are. Hopefully it's the virtual background will do its job. But just a disclaimer there, I think I found a quiet spot, but just in case something happens or I get kicked out of this conference hall. What I'm going to do is I'll share a presentation. I'm a fairly informal person, so I'll kind of walk you through our thesis around Brisk and just where the EdTech stack is going. But the real fun part is really showing the product off. And so being able to demonstrate, look, AI, we're still talking about, we're at the infancy of AI. And so hopefully through the presentation, it's a lot about what is the value that educators are getting right now. But what really excites me and what really excites our team is really where it'll go in 5 years. And so hopefully we'll be able to illustrate not just where we're at with AI, but where we can be in a couple of years. So with that, I will share my screen and we can go from there. Great. Can I get a thumbs up from folks that you can see my screen? We're all good on that front. Great. Well, nothing like starting with a big headline like why AI will change edtech as we know it. Note that it actually isn't why AI will change teaching, and I think that's a really fundamental difference in the way at least we think about Brisk. It's, Robert has a lot of rightful skepticism around, claims that we've made in the past about technology being able to fundamentally change teaching. Our thesis at Brisk is really that, we know what high quality instruction already looks like, and that actually that picture is not a tech enabled. It's not a tech forward picture. Technology can just be a way in which it enables high quality teaching that we already know in the first place. So I'm going to start with kind of just a brief rundown of why we believe at Brisk the current state of edtech is actually failing, what we believe an AI native future classroom could look like, and how we as Brisk, as developers, as product folks, conceive of a world in which a technology could take those steps towards that AI native future. So just a little bit of background on myself. I went to school in the Bay Area. I ended up going to the White House right after college, both under the Obama administration and then the Trump administration, working in the Office of Science and Tech Policy. From there, I ended up joining the Chan Zuckerberg initiative, where I spent 5 years working with John Bailey and other amazing folks to really conceive of kind of how we might be able to use technology to be able to enable what we know to be high quality instruction, whether it be project-based learning and other types of approaches. And there I kind of experienced something that I had to experience firsthand to really believe, which is, educators over the last 20 years have a lot of technology. And my project at CZI was to basically build a point solution called Notebooks, which was essentially Google Docs, but designed for the classroom, that was embedded within the Summit Learning program, which was a program that was built on project-based learning. And through that process, I felt like I learned a lot about kind of some of the areas where edtech is really failing. And I'll kind of walk through what we think those are. But right now I am at Brisk Teaching. We founded Brisk Teaching in 2023, and we've been on a rocket ship. And so kind of really excited to kind of share why we believe Brisk has been doing really well and kind of where we're going. So let me just walk you into kind of where my slides are jumping ahead. Give me 1 second. It's a little slow. There we go. So let me talk a little bit about what we see to be the problem with edtech. So I actually wasn't around in the 80s, but I hear it was a fun time. In the 80s were also the first time where student information systems were introduced in the classroom as a way to be able to manage a lot of student data that was just starting to become digitized. But over the last 40 years, we have layered technology onto educator workflows, right? So the SISs in the 80s and 90s, in the 2000s, it was rudimentary learning management systems, Google Docs, then one-to-one devices happened, and technology has just been layered and layered onto educators. And now, what we see in the modern teacher workflow is actually, it's just dozens of different tools. And, if you open up a teacher's web browser, you just see a plethora of technology that they're using. And in some ways, if there's a problem that an educator is having and technology could foreseeably be a solution, there's probably a product that a district is purchasing that's related to it. But what we see is that this technology has been layered incrementally over onto teachers, and so there actually hasn't been a refactor. Educators have become glorified operators of all of these edtech tools, but not really. The one adjective that I think any educator or any district leader would say that does not describe their technology approach is coherent. Right? There's curriculum, there's LMSs, there's assessments platforms, and educators are almost doing the job of stitching them all together. And so it's gotten to the point, particularly with one-to-one devices, but then COVID era pandemic, spurred technology purchases, that educators are using 148 different edtech tools in a given school year. And it's mirrored on the student side. And so what you see is this intense fragmentation that, in our opinion at Brisk, is one of the problems that AI could potentially solve. It really doesn't grapple with the interconnectedness of teaching, right? When you think about what high quality instruction looks like, when you're grading assignments, it's not just to provide a score to students, but it's also to start to think about what differentiation looks like at the next stage. But our edtech tools really fundamentally don't reflect that nuance because they're so fragmented. We all actually know, in some ways, the fundamentals of what high quality instruction looks like. This is an instructional cycle. If I walk into many districts, that comes up on the screen or is clear, which is like, we know whether it's assigning curriculum, tutoring, project-based learning, what high-quality instruction looks like. It's some intervention. It's the distribution of the intervention to students who need that intervention, the assessment of impact, and then the adaptation piece. And that adaptation piece is not happening in most classrooms today. The problem with EdTech is in some ways we've just added technology to each of these stages of the instructional cycle. So we have now core curriculum that reflects a lot of what the planning and instruction should look like. We have supplementary curriculum, we have LMSs that distribute it, we have assessments to be able to do it, but really what you're seeing is that teachers are really managing the relationships between these different systems, as you can kind of see here. You're taking data from one place and trying to put it into the other, trying to reflect on how you should be adapting your core curriculum based on the content that you're seeing in your student information system or your assessments platform. And the problem with this approach fundamentally is like maybe you can manage this at the class level, but you definitely can't manage it at the individual student level, which is really what we think about when we think about differentiation. And so we're really excited at Brisk if we really care about things like appropriate challenges for students and productive struggle. We really need to think about how we can conceive of a world in which educators can give productive struggle for each student, which means that you actually have to build technology that reflects that level of personalization to an individual student. So to recap our thesis with Brisk, the problem and opportunity we see is that educators are overloaded. There are 140 different tools that they have to use in the school year. We think that the system is fragmented in a way that really cuts across what high quality instruction looks like. And the impact beyond teacher burnout is that students are frequently not challenged because it's actually impossible to scale these instructional cycles that we know to be high quality instruction. So let's talk about AI, because that's the topic that, we're all here to discuss. There's obviously a lot of optimism here. I'm at a conference right now, the Future of Education and Technology conference. I have to say at least 70% of the sessions are about AI. It is everywhere from songwriting sessions to, how does this help administrators? It's clear that people are really excited. But one thing I can also share with you is it's actually been disappointing to see 2 years since ChatGPT was launched, the use cases for AI that are called out are lesson plans. They are the basic resources. There is literally no depth that has evolved in the last 2 years of ChatGPT being out. And one of the problems that I see happening is that in some ways we're recreating some of the problems with the existing edtech stack. We're just extending the same patterns. I have talked to so many startups and legacy edtech providers that are saying like, okay, we're adding AI to our assessment platform. We're adding AI to, PowerSchool has added their Power Buddy to our SIS system, so you can interact with your PowerSchool data with AI, right? But there isn't a broader question of like, AI it could be an enabler of actually a reconception of the system rather than just an extension of what we know. The problem is that the value of if you actually believe AI is transformative, and I'm both one of the most radical optimists with AI and probably one of the biggest cynics as well. But the thing that I don't want to happen is that it'll be incremental. The value will be pigeonholed. You will go into the platform you've always used and be able to do something 10% faster, when we think that in some ways there is a broader opportunity with AI. And if you actually look at these time-intensive workflows, the real opportunity is to actually be able to automate some of that work that teachers are doing between these systems, which is really where we think that the value of AI will accrue. So our question with Brisk is, how do we reimagine the ed tech stack itself, those fundamental building blocks in the era of AI? So let's talk a little bit about Brisk. Brisk, in its very essence, is our belief that we can build a tool that starts with the existing paradigm A, which is where the edtech stack exists right now. If you go to the exposition hall right now, you will see 100 different vendors that are doing amazing, great work. And we can't ignore that work that's happening now. But in some ways, they're an obstacle to what we believe could be a more coherent, easier workflow for educators. So we embed with the current system, but want to build a bridge to be able to get to a place where some of these opportunities can be unlocked. So what we've decided to do is to build personalized and integrated AI directly into the legacy edtech stack. So rather than building a new platform for a teacher to use, you can actually start with an extension that automates some of the workflows where teachers are already working. So they have not just the integration piece of like the last mile delivery problem, but also you're able to capture data exhaust across a teacher's workflow in really meaningful ways that can then be used as a starting point for further differentiation personalization. In some ways, if you think about this core instructional cycle, you can say, okay, we're going to build a platform, say Summit Learning Platform, which is what I worked on at the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, do all project-based learning, curriculum, assessments, all those things. And you're either in the Summit platform or you're not. Or you can build automations that are so light that you can use it within the existing system, but still get the benefit of AI. And that's kind of the approach we've taken. So this approach has worked. We just hit 1 million teachers, almost all of which are in the United States. I think you're all familiar with the number of teachers that, almost 4 million. So we are used by over 1 in 5 teachers in the US at this point. And we really think that educators are latching on to how easy Brisk is to use within their existing system, rather than you having to use using a whole different platform or tool. What really is latching on is Brisk is incredibly easy for teachers to use. It's integrated within the tools they're using. On the left-hand side, what you'll see is our feedback tool, which generates first pass feedback directly in the Google Doc comments. They can upload a rubric. It can be standards aligned if they want. But on the back end, what we're actually developing is we're trying to reflect those nuanced, interconnected relationships between the different workflows of teachers and to be able to build off of those pieces of data exhaust. And so our ideal vision is to start by connecting all of these different workflows that teachers are already using, but then saying, okay, we have all of this information, we're supporting your workflows, let's actually replace your supplementary curriculum with Brisk. And so over time, our hope is to eventually replace some of these legacy categories with something that is more AI native, but in a more incremental way. And so eventually we hope to be able to really truly power these personalization loops to be able to accommodate that nuance and interconnectedness that high quality instructors have, but to be able to empower educators to do the things that they joined the profession in the first place to, which is actually to spend time with students rather than spend time behind a computer, basically operating all these different instructional relationships that they have to work through. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to pause to see if it's appropriate to pause for questions. Robert, let me know. Otherwise, I'm happy to jump right into a demo and kind of work through a couple of the features in Brisk.
Well, I have one question immediately, Armand, which is, and I hope I didn't misunderstand you when you said that you did not want AI to be a 10% improvement, but you wanted to be transformative. Unless I've got that wrong, I say a lot of us would love to have 10% improvement. Especially in a field where test scores, for example, have been flat for decades, and we lost 20 years of progress post-COVID on NAEP. What's wrong with 10% improvement in the profession and in student outcomes?
That's a great question. So I would ground it in potentially not a 10% improvement in academic outcomes, but a 10% improvement on ed tech itself and the outcomes that ed tech is driving, which in my opinion is actually not a large impact right now, in my opinion. And so I think that there's a transformative way in which ed tech can be empowered using AI, which it is currently not doing a great job at. So I would say not a 10% improvement on the outcomes that ed tech is driving. Hopefully we can do a 5x improvement, which could potentially be a 10 or 20% improvement, or half a standard deviation on outcomes would be fantastic. And we hope to be able to have that type of impact on learners as well.
Great. So we'll go right ahead with the demonstration, and I hope you're going to show us the feedback, because that was the thing that made me go, this feels different.
Yeah. As some of you know, we may have, I had the chance to to present at a working group at AEI recently, and it was really great to get the feedback from some of the state chiefs that are there. And it's been a really great catalyst for us at Brisk to kind of grow in a couple of those different states. So, Brisk is really easy to use. All you have to do is press add to Chrome. As you can see here, we just hit 1 million users, which we're really thrilled to kind of do. And it's really easy for a teacher to start. No rostering, nothing. They just go and start. And 90% of our users are free users, which basically means that we've been able to grow really quickly because we really fundamentally think educators don't have a lot of capacity to spend in their personal money. And so we've been working with a lot of districts and schools, but try to increase access as a starting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a piece of student work. We find that educators are frequently reviewing student work in the digital on their digital devices. This has actually changed since I went to high school, when I was still printing out work and sharing it with teachers, and they were writing it up with pen and paper. What we've found is that 95 to 100% of educators, especially in the middle and high school levels, are having students submit all their work digitally, or almost all of their work digitally. And so the idea that they're spending their Sunday nights grading papers is actually something that a lot of district administrators care about, because they're losing a lot of their teachers to burnout. And so we find that often grading is something that can be really time intensive and something that could potentially be addressed using AI. Now, AI is not going to provide grades to students, but it can definitely be, if we think about it, like autocomplete, to be able to help teachers with some of the basics of feedback. So I'm going to, this is a piece of student work. I'm going to resolve some of the comments I just made this afternoon. And let's click targeted feedback, which is one of the feedback styles. We can go in and upload a rubric. So it's pretty easy for an educator to just say, like, hey, I have this rubric. Maybe my district just provided it. Maybe I've used Brisk to create it. And what you'll see here is it'll ingest it. And then I'm going to say Brisk it. And what it's going to do is it's going to take that content, read it, and then draft first pass feedback directly in the Google Doc comments, as you can see here. Now, mind you, it's all left in drafts mode. So the teacher ultimately is the one that is responsible for editing this content and making sure it's appropriate before sharing it with students. But as you can see here, we find that it provides high quality feedback that an educator might not even have capacity in the first place to provide. We see two big instructional impacts when we kind of work with districts. One is that teachers are assigning writing more. Educators often find that they're the bottleneck to actually grading a lot of these assignments. And so the average student is actually not getting that many opportunities to practice writing because their educators just simply don't have the capacity to review it. They often are relying on peer feedback and other ways, which often have its own instructional purpose, but there's an over-reliance of it. And second, what we're finding is that students are getting timely feedback. Now, there's a whole research basis through John Hattie and other folks that the most important thing when it comes to productive struggle is being able to get timely feedback on your work. And so by being able to take this from 2 weeks to 2 days, students are actually getting a lot more opportunities to actually revise, to actually improve their work, rather than getting feedback 2 weeks later. By then, for a student, the instructional impact of that feedback is basically nullified. And so being able to deliver feedback just in time is something that we've found to be incredibly impactful in the districts we work with. I'm going to pause there. That's one of our tools. Any questions or thoughts?
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute. Well, if you don't mind, Armand, why don't we just throw right out to our panelist and Alex Barron, I want to start with you. You have been piloting Brisk AI in your classrooms for a couple of months now. I'm wondering if you could walk us through some of the things you're noticing with your practical, real-world experience about how your teachers have been adjusting to using these tools.
Yeah, thanks so much, Robert. And thanks and kudos to you, Armand. Your team is leading into this tech in a super thoughtful way. And I think from inside the schoolhouse, it's funny to watch teachers adjust to the AI. Sometimes it's like, it's watching a grandparent use an iPhone for the first time, where they're like amazed by it. But it can also be disorienting for sure. And I loved your starting slide with all the tabs, because that really is what computers of teachers look like. They have tons of tabs. And the reason they have so many tabs is because they have so many jobs to be done. And I guess in prior ed tech, we were really good at saying, okay, we need a printer because we have to print out copies for kids. We need a calculator because we need to calculate. And I think what was interesting about watching teachers use Brisk at our school is that we often start our pilots with what's a specific problem that teachers have and what's an education tech solution that can solve that problem. And I think with Brisk, one of the things that we were wrestling with a little bit in our pilot is it was more the opposite. It was like, oh, we have this amazing LLM technology, and large language models are great at like remixing and generating text. So given that we have this awesome LLM, now how do we backward map to which teacher jobs map onto that challenge? And so it feels like we have an amazing solution, and what we're trying to do is match the solution to a problem. We're still trying to find what are the most important problems to match the solution with. And I guess to be specific, you just showed the teacher feedback tool. And I think for us, we did have a couple teachers use that. And for context, I work at a pre-K to 12 charter school in DC. So I gave this to first grade English language teachers. I gave this to seventh grade science teachers, high school math and English teachers, the whole gamut, special education teachers. And I think at the end of the day, a couple of things that popped up as the most highly used are what you said, which is one, differentiation at the end of the day is teachers' biggest challenge. They have so many kids with so many different learning needs. And when I talk to teachers and watch teachers use the platform, the biggest thing that they were doing were creating reteach plans most often, just because it's like we taught the quadratic formula. Kids had these three main misconceptions. Let's generate, using Brisk, 3 reteach plans that target those misconceptions. And that was super useful. We also have a ton of English learners, and we have people from all over the world. And so using the language translation features, I think the one that you showed, which is the feedback tool, we had a couple teachers use that. Interestingly, some of our strongest teachers were the most hesitant about using it because as much as we complain about grading, we don't want to grade. It is a sacred part of our job, and feedback feels adjacent to grading. So we had a couple teachers almost say like, oh, I used it and I tried it, but it felt a little icky and I need more experience. So it's interesting to watch teachers lean into it, but certainly for weaker teachers, it's maybe better feedback than they might give by default. And the last thing I would say is I had a couple teachers say, wow, we like loved the exit ticket tool or the quiz generator or things like that. And then they said, but you, Alex, probably don't want me to use that because we have our own like curriculum and we try to, really enforce curricular fidelity. And so it's interesting to kind of see the tension that can arise between pushing curriculum fidelity and then teachers using it to generate lesson plans or quizzes that aren't part of the curriculum, and what's the dance between those things. So those were a few high-level things we saw, but I think to summarize, the biggest use case we saw was more on the differentiation side rather than the feedback side, but happy to share more.
I want to pursue the feedback piece a little bit, Alex, because I was actually sitting next to you in that AEI working group that Armand referred to when we saw this demonstration. And my immediate takeaway to the feedback tool was, that's pretty good feedback. In other words, we were same thing, analyzing a piece of student writing, giving feedback. So much so that I remember thinking that some of the feedback that the AI tool was giving was frankly better than what I might have given to my fifth graders, back in the day. And then I had these two thoughts in this order. The first was, if I'm a really good teacher, I'm probably looking at that feedback and I'm learning from it. In other words, it's helping me with my giving feedback. If I'm a, quote, lazy teacher or an ineffective teacher, maybe I'm just passing the feedback along from AI without even giving it a second thought, just because it makes my life easier. I don't want you to throw any of your teachers under the bus. But are you seeing, to the degree that you're watching teachers use these feedback tools, are you seeing that dynamic play out?
Yeah, I love that question. I think to paraphrase John Dewey, it's like, we don't learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. And I think it's the same with AI. We don't learn from AI. We have to reflect on the AI and the feedback in order to grow from it. And so I definitely, in our own lives, it's like, has GPS made you or I better at navigation? For some of us, maybe we're like reflecting on it and it's helping us get better. For others, we're just outsourcing it. I think in teaching at our school, what I've seen is we've had a couple teachers really say, wow, like this has given me new ideas about how to approach reteaching and feedback, and they really are growing from it. But I think that just to be honest, I did have some teachers, again, especially our strongest teachers, say like, oh, like I could have come up with that myself. I could have done that, or I could have done better. I think the biggest place where I saw it is we have a lot of teachers who do take 2 weeks to grade, and then kids are not getting work cycled back to them. And so to Armand's point, for those teachers, this was absolutely huge. And it's huge for the kids too. The question as to whether they're learning from it, I think
the teachers.
The teachers. I think one push I would make, and Armand, I think this could be something to think about, is like, how can the tool actually start to, through professional development or through feedback to the teacher, make visible to the teacher, hey teacher, like here's the feedback I gave, and this was almost the thought process that I went through to generate this feedback. These are the types of things that I was doing to offer this feedback, because right now the teachers see the feedback, but they may not totally understand what it is about the feedback that's good and what makes feedback good and how it was about. So I don't think teachers are yet learning that without someone guiding them to see why the feedback is good, especially if they're weaker teachers.
This was part of my takeaway as well, Alex, which was whether I as a teacher learn from it or just use it mutely and pass it along. Either way, the student's getting better feedback.
Yes, which we need.
Right, yeah. Right. Daisy Christodoulou, I don't want to paint you as an ed tech skeptic like me, but because you live in this world, you have written that education has a history of being impervious to inventions that have transformed society in other ways. I'm quoting a piece that you wrote, citing radio, television, the internet, smartphones as inventions that changed the world, but not education. So where are you on this? Is AI going to be different or not? You're muted, Daisy. Sorry.
Robert, can I just pick up on the feedback point that we're having? Is that okay? Because the organisation I work for, we kind of specialise in assessing writing. We do a lot on feedback. And I do want to sort of come in here and almost maybe provide a contrarian view. So we've done a lot of work on kind of AI feedback of the type you're looking at there. And even before the LLMs came along, we were thinking a lot about feedback and optimal feedback. And not just us, but there's a lot of research out there showing that written comments are not an optimal form of feedback. They're not a great way of giving feedback to learners. And I think this speaks to a wider issue with AI, that if we're just trying to get it to reproduce what professionals currently do, maybe we need to stop and ask ourselves, is what professionals currently do the best way of doing things? So written comments, let me quote from Dylan William, who's one of the kind of seminal researchers with formative assessment. He is very critical of written comments as a means of providing feedback, because he says students don't know what to do with the information that's given in them. And so if I can just quote from him, one of the things he says is he was in a school once and he asked the student had been given feedback that you need to be more systematic in planning your scientific inquiries. And Dylan says to the student, what does that mean to you? What are you going to do differently? And the student said, I don't know. If I knew how to be more systematic, I would have been more systematic the first time. And, that's a very flippant sort of reply from the student. But when I first read that, I cringed, because I used to be an English teacher and I spent a lot of time, as you say, the Sunday afternoons, the Sunday evenings, writing comments like that on my students' work. And yes, it was very time consuming, but it was almost worse than time consuming, because as Dylan William goes on to say, it isn't helpful. And he says it's like telling an unsuccessful comedian to be funnier. It's true, but useless. And so the point is, you can then say, oh, but if they gave more detailed feedback and if they said more things. But the point is a deeper kind of philosophical point here, which is prose is not optimized often for telling you what you need to do to improve. And there's an issue here around also rubrics, that rubrics are the standard way of grading, but the evidence base around rubrics is incredibly poor. Rubrics do not give you accurate information. They do not give you helpful information. There is a huge research basis on this. And at No More Marking, where I work, we do things completely differently. Our assessment system gets rid of the rubric. It gets rid of the detailed criteria, because these detailed criteria and rubrics, they give you the illusion of objectivity. People think by using them, they're all agreeing, and they're not. When you look at the data that comes from them, they're not. So part of me, look, the reason for getting AI to do the written feedback is just to say, well, look, if it is mostly performative, let's have the performative thing completed by computer. But let's not kid ourselves. I would say that all of those written comments are really moving the dial on student improvement, because there is vanishingly little evidence to suggest that they are.
Okay, can I interject? Jim, I had this idea in my head, Daisy, and I don't know, maybe I got it from Dylan William. I can't remember the research site, but it's something on the order of 1/3 to 1/2 of all feedback that teachers give to students is actually bad feedback or ineffective. Does this ring a bell? So in other words,
yes,
if that's
definitely.
the case, regardless of what the figure is, if teachers are not very good at giving feedback, then this strikes me that we're kind of in a cul-de-sac here. Either their ability to evaluate feedback that AI provides will be less than helpful, or they don't know good feedback when they see it.
Robert, I can go even further here and address the question you started off with, which is, quoting one of my pieces on why hasn't technology transformed education. The reason why technology hasn't transformed education, my argument is because education is in the grip of really bad ideas. And this actually ties into the feedback point. So what does Dylan Williams say would be optimal feedback? He actually uses an analogy from baseball. And he says, if you look at, and actually I think there's a lot of reason to look at professional sports, because I think professional sports are very good at giving feedback in a way that educators often aren't. And he talks about how, a baseball coach might break down all of the different steps involved in a particular sort of motion, in a particular play. And he calls this, he says, you don't just need to say to someone, you need to be more systematic. You need to give them a recipe for action, specific steps. And one of the reasons why this does not happen in education is because we are in the grip of a fallacy that skills can be taught directly, right? And actually, to go back to something Armand said, when he talked a lot about project-based learning and how we know that project-based learning is optimal, I would disagree. We know that project-based learning, there is not a lot of evidence behind it. And project-based learning is problematic because it is attempting to teach skills directly. And that ties into the feedback problem. The reason teachers don't give feedback well is because what you really need when you're giving feedback is to break a complex skill like writing an essay down into its systematic steps and teach those. And often when you do that, what you are doing doesn't look like the end goal. It doesn't look like the project or the final skill. That is the way to give really good feedback. But we are trapped in a model where we think we can teach skills directly. So technology, in this sense, for all that I am, we work with AI and we do a lot of very interesting things with it. But, you have to get the fundamentals right. And if you are just essentially playing around with a kind of educational Lysenkoism, then all the AI in the world is not going to solve that.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I think this is a really interesting conversation, because the way I think about it, and I really appreciate your contribution, Daisy. I wonder if there is like a breakdown between form and content, right? Where the content is, what does high quality instruction look like? Now, feedback might not be, the vast majority of educators might not be providing high quality feedback right now on the content basis. And then on the form basis, I think you mentioned written comments are not something that have traditionally kind of moved the needle. I'd be curious kind of what is that new world that we want to move towards. But I think on that content piece, I think the interesting opportunity with AI is it is so adaptable, right? What you shared around, most educators are giving feedback in a more direct instruction way where you didn't think systematically about this. What we've at least found from educators is that, one of the best ways to provide feedback is to use a lot of probing questions to help that student actually in that metacognitive process. And so we've included some of that. But really, I think that the opportunity that's so exciting to me personally about AI is that as a developer, as someone who's working with districts, we don't need to necessarily bring the pedagogical perspective, that we can empower educators and their administrators with the tools to be able to create the instruction that they want to see out in the world. We partner with districts, for example, that are really UDL focused, and they want their teachers to be creating only UDL based lesson plans. And so we can work with them on those solutions. And I think that's the optimism I bring, where the previous generation of ed tech had to have a very strong pedagogical perspective, like a project-based learning perspective or an anti-project-based learning perspective. And what I see that is really the flexibility of AI is that the technology can be flexible. And I'm curious if you agree with that, or if you feel like, hey, that this is like that the content itself can be adaptable based on what we see as high quality instruction, whether it be kind of some of the comments you're making around rubrics not being aligned or feedback being too direct instruction based. And I'm curious if that feels responsive to some of what you're sharing.
I think that technology can be flexible. I think one of the issues with LLMs in particular is because their strength is language, it's got us into the mindset of thinking, looking at things that we can do that involve language. And as I say, you know, we're really influenced by Michael Polanyi's work on tacit knowledge, that sometimes there are things that are it's hard to do with language. And I think we know from the data that with grading essays and giving feedback, we often default to doing that with prose rubrics, when actually prose may not be the optimal form. So I think, you know, what's that line? You know, we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. We have a tool at the moment in the form of generative AI that is very good at language, but I think we still have to be careful to recognise that those kind of written comments in particular, it may be very good at producing those, but that may not necessarily be what we want to be focusing on.
John Bailey, let me go ahead, Armand.
I was just say I'm really excited about the non-language application of generative AI, because I think that's an opportunity that developers, including myself, have not been able to fully invest time in. But for example, we're really excited to allow students to provide voice recordings of reflections that they're having as they're working on essays, so that teachers can also provide feedback on that the process itself rather than the product, which we find that often educators are focused on the product, but not the process. But the process is really how you become a better writer. And so I think there's so many more opportunities I see actually with AI to say there are ways in which we've been over relying on prose as a means of delivering feedback, because an average educator, you know, who has 100 students in Texas in a large district is not going to be able to get you know, provide non-language based feedback. But maybe there's this opportunity here to actually scale what we know is high quality as well. But I'll throw it back to John.
John, unless there's something that you want to unburden yourself of, I have a specific question I'd like to ask, which is you probably have the broader view of what's out there by dint of where you sit in terms of, you know, who's building what for whom and what use. So I'm really interested to hear your perspective on this conversation and where you're seeing the energy in AI tool development. Is it, hey, teachers, tell us what you want to do and we'll build a tool, or is it a productivity tool? Where is the smart money, so to speak, going in this sector right now? And is it going to be useful?
Great questions. I love this debate too. Maybe just a couple things too. Like there's one thing that I just want to call out because it was playing up, but I think it's important that it was coming up in the conversations and also in some of the demos that we just saw with Brisk, which has been, you know, so fascinating. I remember meeting Armand at South by Southwest. I think it was 2 years ago where we were first talking about this. So it's just incredible what you've built since then. But the thing is, like, if you think about every other technology that's been introduced, it's been about making it cheaper and easier to access information. That was like the printing press, it's books, it was kind of computers, and then it was the internet. And I think one of the fallacies we fell for in ed tech, and myself included, has been that if you just expand access to information, good things will happen. And yes, in some cases that's the case. But it turns out, like, just having access to more information doesn't make you necessarily smarter. Like, Robert, all the books behind you doesn't necessarily, you have access to that, but you have to like read it and start putting it to work. And that putting it to work is where you get expertise. And I think this is kind of the mental model I've been like wrestling with, why AI is so different, is that it's not, if you treat it just as a search engine, I guarantee you're going to be different. You're going to be disappointed, like 8 times out of 10. But if you think of it as you have access to different types of experts, that's when the wonder and the amazing thing comes up. And what Armand was just showing you was different types of expertise that could be applied to different types of challenges inside of a classroom. And that a teacher all of a sudden now has a teaching assistant that can help them with analyzing or it's a bunch of more action verbs because of the expertise that's kind of encoded into these systems. And that's the thing that I think is like amazing, is that all of a sudden the cost of accessing expertise is going down to zero. That right now a superintendent, if they want to write a parent communication, they have an expert that can help them in that. If a teacher needs some brainstorming on how to translate a student's IEP into a lesson plan that works just for them, they have access to an expertise that can kind of do that. And you can give it sub-expertise, your district's curriculum. You can give it additional sub-expertise, which is project-based learning or not project-based learning, or core curriculum or not. Like all this sort of like sub-expertise that can kind of play out. So I think that's like what's so powerful, and what for me feels like this is very different, a very different moment in technology's history than what we've had in the past. Now, your other point, and this gets a little bit what Daisy was saying too, I actually think like the thing that excites me the most right now is we have AI. The AI that we all sort of know is you can, it reads and you text back to it. But the more exciting modalities that are coming out are the ones that you talk to it and it listens to you. If you haven't played with ChatGPT's advanced voice, it's amazing. Like it understands your emotional sort of tones in it. It responds in an encouraging way, or it could be funny. It's just more human-like. And right now, like 50% of my ChatGPT engagements are all talking to it and talking back to me. The next generation of this is vision. And Google sort of showed us this a couple months ago. ChatGPT sort of very discreetly kind of rolled it out at the end of the month. And that's where all of a sudden ChatGPT not only reads and not only listens and talks, but it also sees. And that's a very different world that we're entering in, where a student can be giving a presentation and an AI system is listening and watching and responding and giving feedback in all the different ways that Daisy was just talking about, or all the different ways that a teacher would want. And I think we're not seeing new applications in education there quite yet. There's one company, Speak, that's doing this in language. We're seeing a lot in healthcare. Healthcare is already generating a lot of amazing tools guiding surgeons based on what the AI is seeing in video with diagnosis. And so I would say for a lot of inspiration for us in education, look to healthcare, because it's very similar. You don't want to disrupt that parent or the patient-doctor relationship. It's highly technical. It needs to be informed by continuous bodies of research. And it's also, I mean, it has high stakes if you get it wrong. And so, but I think we're seeing amazing breakthroughs there that are going to help inspire some new applications in education. I don't think I've seen that in education quite yet, but I think it's there for the taking.
Let me ask a super blunt question, John. Answer this how you will, and Armand and Daisy, feel free to weigh in as well. The people who are developing these tools, in their candid moments, how are they describing them? Are they saying this is how we teacher-proof education, so to speak, or are they thinking of them more as productivity tools?
So I think that's a complicated question in some ways, because you have the model providers like OpenAI and Google with Gemini and Claude. What they feel like they're building is just an amazing set of intelligence and experts that could be used in a whole variety of different ways. And it needs to be clear for everyone watching today too. I mean, they're not quite sure what they're building yet. Like you have to think of it as they built these capabilities, and then they're releasing them in watching to see how people might use them and how they might employ those and use those. And so, I know Sam Altman from day one has talked about this should never replace a teacher, but he's very, very passionate about the fact that this could be a tutor. And I've heard the same thing with talking to CEOs over at Google. We had NVIDIA CEO come to AI, and he was also very energized by this. And you can't understand it unless you begin playing with the models and also seeing what they're seeing on the horizon, which is this vision understanding, voice understanding interaction. So I think, in that respects, they're thinking they're building amazing expertise capabilities that could be used in a whole bunch of different ways. And they're not quite sure how. And that's where they need people like Armand, they need people like Alex, they need people like Daisy and like you too, Robert, asking the skeptical questions, but also finding the use cases of saying like, that's a distraction, or that's actually going to amplify and accelerate really bad instruction. But also this is, my gosh, like OpenAI, you never thought of this. This is going to be amazing in terms of making parent communications better and more efficient. It's going to help chronic absenteeism. It's going to help us bring parents in. It's going to diffuse anger. Like there's a whole litany of use cases there that have yet to be untapped. So that's what I've experienced so far.
Alex is the one among us who still goes to a place called a school Monday through Friday. What do you want these tools to do? What's going to make your life? Well, maybe that's the wrong question. Not what's going to make your life easier. What's going to improve student outcomes for you and your schools and your students?
Yeah, and I think building on what John was saying and trying to understand a little bit, like we've had Khan Academy for a long time. Now we have Khanmigo, and I'm still trying to figure out, John and others, like how exactly Khanmigo will be so much better than Khan Academy, or why the expertise that's nested within an AI tool is so much better than Google used to be, in the same way that a superintendent could have Googled, like, how do I write a good letter to parents, or a teacher could Google good lesson plans, and they weren't always good. But AI, a lot of the AI content isn't that good either. I mean, it's the definition of average because it's the sum aggregate of all the stuff that it's scrubbed from the internet. So in some ways, it's like, is it really expertise, or is it sort of average content that needs to be bulked up? And I think I just say that to say I'm still trying to understand why this will be transformational and different. But to answer your question, Robert, I think there are a couple things that, like, educators clearly don't want to do that I still wish, like, I'm hearing Armand talk about, like, oh, we have this comprehensive omnibus solution where we get, like, everything done. But again, I would love an AI to, like, solve our master schedule, like, or like, so, like, you know, Google's quantum computer just solved a math problem that would take 10 septillion years. Like, try a master schedule. Like, it's unreal and it's annoying and everybody hates it. Try solving substitute teaching arrangements on a daily basis for a school district with 80,000 people. Like, those are things that I would, like, clearly love for AIs to do that are very specific, very singular, and not necessarily pedagogical for learning based. And I'd close by saying, like, on the learning based side, I would be so thrilled if Khanmigo or some of these chat-based stuff could get so good that a kid would feel, especially a struggling student, would feel comfortable engaging and being tutored by it. I'm just trying to figure out why that tutoring relationship would be so transformationally different from, like, them watching Khan Academy or some of the other self-teaching tools that are out there. But maybe it's the conversational aspect. I think we'll see. But that's what I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. But if we could do that, I would love that, to have every kid have their own tutor. That would be great.
Armand, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, if I could just add on to what John and Alex shared, I think I experienced the same kind of phenomena that I think John described, which is, I think in San Francisco at these AI companies and labs, I think there's a lot of optimism about teaching, healthcare, all of these different spaces. And there's a focus on treating it like a technical problem to be solved. Like, we can have an AI tutor for every student. This will alleviate the needs for teachers, right? But I think there's, like, a lack of, like, the social and the system understanding, which I think is the reason why these spaces are so important. Because we find, you know, I'll pick on Khanmigo for this example, because, you know, we've kind of seen it in place and stuff like that, and there's been a lot of criticism. But this concept of, like, an always patient AI tutor that a student is just going to open up and power up and kind of go and use isn't something that we're seeing play out in classrooms. And I think there was just this belief that, from the Sam Altmans of the world, who I greatly respect in so many ways, that all we need was just a chatbot for a student to be able to engage with. And it's kind of, John actually mentioned this earlier, there was this illusion in the 2000s that all we needed was the internet. If a student could have all the resources that they would have had in the library at their fingertips, that would solve the need for education. And so I think really the thing that's interesting, and the reason why I think it's important to be so embedded with educators in classrooms, is that teaching is a very social problem, and you need to be able to build the systems in place to be able to hold students accountable, to keep them in productive struggle. These are challenges that teachers have by themselves. There's no way that AI can solve it by themselves. And so I think, you know, my feedback always for Salcon and the folks that I know there has always been, like, you need to be in classrooms more, because, you know, even their relationship, like, we have a lot of content. How is it impacting outcomes? Like, there's, like, a big gap between great high quality content and learning outcomes. And, like, I still think, you know, these tools need to be really embedded within the flows of instruction. And so hopeful that over the years we can start to that will start to shake out. And I think around Alex's point around smash their schedules and things like that. I'm confident that hopefully soon AI will be able to solve that. Maybe Bristol as well. But I think that's an example of like these problems are like very niche and specific, and we need specific solutions to more complicated problems than we might have in a general AI tool that can do everything. Because if you do everything, you can't do everything well. So you end up kind of lowering the bar of those capabilities. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yeah, just two other points on this too. Like there's Paymon, who used to be the CEO of where's or the superintendent
Paymon Honeyford?
Yeah, he's
in New Jersey.
New Jersey. He's building something called Timely, which is trying to tackle schedules using AI. And so I think there's something there too. Also, there's an interesting experiment. It's not it's accessible to like a developer community right now, but Google has a LLM that they've trained on just high quality education materials. They call that LearnLM. And it's rolling out as an experiment to kind of be able to see is there ways of embedding and training on just high quality education and instructional. And I think we need more experimentation and versions of that, but it's been fun to be able to play with that for a little bit too. The one other thing too that I think is interesting about Conmigo is that we've had Kristen Giserbo at AI in the past, but this is the remarkable thing about it is like Kristen is helping to quote program the tutoring, and like she's a learning officer, she's a curriculum expert, she's not a programmer. But it's like the fact that she just using English language can through prompts change, the way that Conmigo behaves. And we can have a debate as to whether it's a good tutor or bad. But I think that's amazing that we can potentially empower a whole generation of curriculum and instructional experts to be able to build, the tutors or the instructional assistants that best meet their kind of like visions and philosophies there. That's never been possible, but it's very much what's happening over in the Khan ecosystem right now.
Daisy, before when we were preparing for this webinar, you and I spoke, and you used this phrase, which I love, that there has to be a human in the loop in this work. Mm-hmm. And that's one of my immediate takeaways from this conversation is maybe the speed limit to all of this is the human in the loop, so to speak. In other words, for years, I've had this idea that, hey, look, if we had better productivity tools, if we were able to maximize teacher time on task, take away some of these other tasks so they could have time to give feedback, develop relationships, et cetera, then this would only be good. But maybe that's a little bit pie-eyed on my part.
Well, I think the thing I wanted to chip in with this previous discussion is I don't think anyone so far has mentioned the issues that generative AI has with hallucinations and reliability, stability. And I think these are going to be, these have not been solved. They might have been
Can you say more about what those are, Daisy?
Well, the fact that they will, generative AI, so not all forms of AI, but the new LLMs, like large language models, they do have a propensity to make stuff up. They're not always right. They're not reliable. And certainly there's ways in which they've reduced that since maybe some of the earlier models, but I don't think there's any model and there's anyone out there claiming that they are always right. And in that sense, actually, it's even different from Google. Actually, you look something up on Google, on Wikipedia, you can trace back the source often. But with LLMs, particularly, and again, I think this is the issue with Conmigo, particularly with maths and with numbers, they do struggle. And as I say, the other, this reminds me a little bit of the sort of discourse around self-driving cars. Yes, they've got better and better, but they still make mistakes. You can say, well, they make fewer mistakes than humans. But if the kind of mistakes they make are particularly egregious or particularly hard to track, how do you design a system that makes errors like that? It's, how do you design a system around a probabilistic LLM model? And because I approach this, we're from the world of assessment. A lot of people in assessment, the technical experts, they think about this in terms of the way engineers think about it. They need some kind of stability. They need some kind of reproducibility. And these probabilistic LLM models, that's an issue. And I also think it's an issue if you're going to use them as tutors if students are engaging with them, because one small error can lead a student completely, on the wrong tack. So the reason I say there has to be a human in the loop is not just because of the social and empathic side of it, although I do think that's important. It's also because I don't think these technologies are in a situation, not just in education, but anywhere else, where they can just be let loose. And so one of the things we spend a lot of time thinking about at Normal Marking and where a lot of our applications work is we've tried to think about the most efficient and effective ways of integrating the human in the loop. Because often it doesn't make sense to just say to a human, oh, just check what the LLM's done. Often that's the default way of putting the human in the loop. That's actually not very efficient or effective, just getting a human to check the working. What we're trying to do is to find some more sophisticated and efficient ways of integrating the human insight and the human accuracy.
And what does that sound like?
Well, at the moment, the way we're looking at feedback is actually not to get the LLM to directly generate it, because we've tried that and we think it makes too many errors. We then tried saying, well, let it do that and let the teacher check it. But what we found, the feedback we got from the teachers, is the time it took them to check everything, even if the error rate was quite small, the time it would take them to read the kid's essay and read the feedback and decide if the LLM feedback was accurate, it was quicker for them to just do all the marking themselves. So that was not an effective way of putting the human in the loop. They either just weren't doing it or it was taking them longer than it would have done. So we've moved to a different model, which is what happens now is our teachers, they will leave audio feedback on a piece of writing. And what will happen is we have AI that does two things. It transcribes the feedback and then it combines it together, and it does give the written feedback for the student. But actually, more importantly, in terms of our model, our theory of feedback, is it prepares a whole class feedback report for the teacher with suggested next steps for the teaching. So with the model we're using is actually not to have the AI give direct feedback. It's to provide, because the teachers are giving the audio feedback, that's much, much quicker than them writing it down. So we can actually get lots of crowdsourced teacher feedback and give it back to the student and the teacher in a much more efficient way. So that's what I'm saying about trying to come up with, clever ways of integrating the human and the AI.
I just realized I'm losing track of time, and I promised we'd go to audience questions sooner than this. So let me give the hashtag out again. It's hashtag AEI or you can email your questions to riley.fletcher@aei.org. That email address is on the promo for this conversation. Here's a question from Dana Goldstein. Nice to see Dana in the audience. I could see this essay grading tool, meaning the Brisk tool, being really helpful, but I'm worried about the temptation to use it as a substitute for actually reading through students' work. We want students to generate their essays on their own without really relying on AI. They should read the book, not just the AI crib notes. They should be coming up with their own thesis statements, struggling with structure, grammar, etc. How do we ask students to put in that hard work when AI is available as a crutch, if adults aren't going to be fully reading through what they produce? I think of this, by the way, as somebody referred to Google Maps, which has actually made me dumber. I can tell you every street within a 5-mile radius of where I grew up, and I can't tell you the names of the streets in my own town now because I have Google Maps to do that for me. Armand, you want to have a crack at that one?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and something that we hear about a lot less from educators, but I think something that does come up. I'm not a former educator, so I often just parrot the folks that use the tool, and I can only share those experiences. But what I've heard from teachers is, one, they are professional, so they deserve professional tools. And so if you think about different sectors and being able to build productivity tools, it should make sense if we treat educators like every other profession, that they are empowered with tools that can help them do their job efficiently and more productively. And so if you think about the role of a student and a teacher, often the student is to stay in productive struggle to be able to develop new skills, and for teachers to help facilitate that process. And that often means holding them accountable to keep them in productive struggle. I think when I think about an educator's role, is to provide the best instruction, the best learning outcomes for that student in a way that feels safe and is able to acknowledge the whole child of the student. And so if a tool is able to help a student if a tool is able to help instruction and help students eventually, I think that is the end result we're all shooting for, whether it's AI or direct instruction or any other kind of instructional approach. I think AI is just a tool like anything else, and since educators are not being held accountable to developing their own writing skills in some ways, and they're there to do a job, we often hear that educators feel like it's a responsible decision for them to actually use Brisk or another AI tool. So that's kind of what I've heard from educators, but I'm curious anyone else on the panel has thoughts on that.
Yeah, Alex, back me up here. Let's play reality check here. Come on, this is in a world that had cliff notes when you and I were kids. This is going to make it a lot easier for kids to just kind of bluff their way through, right?
Yeah, and teachers. I think there was at a friend's school, they sent out a note to all the kids saying, if you use ChatGPT to write your college essay, you will face disciplinary action. And then at the same day, they sent an email to all the staff members saying, we know you have to write a lot of college recommendations. Please feel free to use ChatGPT to generate those things. And I think to Dana Goldstein, I love your work, by the way. I think one of the hardest parts about teaching for me was always holding myself to the same standards that I held my kids to. If I'm going to ask them to be quiet and focus for 90 minutes, am I able to do that? And or to be nice to each other, be fair, all these things. And I think, to Armand's point, teachers aren't practicing writing. That's what the kids are practicing. But teachers are always practicing reading student work, making sense of it, and giving feedback. That's the teacher's craft that they should be continuously improving in. And so that's why I stood by my point that I want AI to help with the parts of teaching that teachers don't want to do and are maybe not directly related to the act of teaching and learning, all the administrivia that teachers deal with. So I do worry a lot about cheating. We have kids turn in paper-based writing first the week before, so they have to have written something by hand the week before they turn in something on the computer. And Armand has some great strategies around showing Google version history to show what were all the changes that were made on this essay within Brisk, and that's another way that we try to detect cheating from students as well.
I love this question.
First of all, I also want to say I love Dana's book. I also want to just say, like, big fan of Teacher Worth. But I actually bring an analogy, I guess, to add on to Alex's point, which is like, I think about it like sometimes when I jump into an Uber and it's very clear that the Uber driver is not driving off of the Google Maps directions. And so I think we want to live in a world where maybe we're in the middle, where the driver has the directions up, can decide not to go use the Google Maps directions, but is at least aware of what the recommendation is. Because I think that's, you don't want someone who's an over-reliant person on Google Maps as a GPS and drives into a pond, which has happened to people. At the same time, you want them to at least be aware of some of the recommendations or options that might be out there in the case of feedback, which is one of the tools that Brisk offers. But I know, as Alex mentioned, there's quite a suite of different functionality I didn't get to share today. But Robert, I'll go back to you. Sorry about
Thanks. That. Here's a question. One criticism with AI is that it can be very helpful for the kids who are already interested in school, who are naturally curious about the world, but the kids who are not interested in school, who are equally uninterested in using AI for education purposes. Is this a solvable problem of student motivation? Who wants it?
I can start, but I feel like I'm talking a lot. So, John, you unmuted. Go ahead, and then I'll.
I think it could be. I want to caveat this. Like, I think I see the potential of this doing that. And again, but you have to kind of play this out. You have to look at the capabilities where they're evolving, and that when the advanced voice, and it's hard to understand it unless you play with it and see it and hear it. And again, when you add visual to it, and then you add this like ability that if you're a student and you're struggling to understand a concept, like I've never seen a technology that no matter what concept you give it with an interest you have, it can make connections. So if you say you want to learn fractions and connect it to Taylor Swift or football or cooking or the great works of Robert Pendicio, it'll do that. Like, it'll use that examples and, like, maybe that can help engagement. Can it be worse? It can't be worse than in some ways that we're not engaging students right now. And so I think that's worthy for some experiments. But I think where the real engagement is going to happen is when you see some of these multimodal capabilities coming out. You're seeing it already in unhealthy ways. Like the New York Times today just had a story about a teenager that's having a relationship with their AI chatbot. That doesn't happen if it's dry and boring. And I think like that is like problematic. That's where this capability is going like in a wrong direction. But if students are developing these kind of emotional connections to it in an unhealthy way, I think there's like a question for us is there a way for us to use that in a healthy, productive, positive way to help make these lessons and materials and curriculum become more alive and more engaging. So, but I think it's going to be up to us and teachers steering it as opposed to just letting it sort of play out.
Daisy, you kind of touched on the subject of this next question, but let's dig a little bit deeper. One concern about AI is that teachers will use it to create lesson plans, and that those lesson plans won't be very high quality. Khan Academy and other organizations may be able to boost the quality of responses teachers get, but for schools and districts that aren't using one of those providers, how do administrators ensure the quality of materials generated by AI? I mean, my own answer to this is a problem that precedes AI with teacher-generated materials, but does AI make that problem worse?
So, yeah, if I take that one, this comes back to the point I was making again about sort of hallucinations and the issues with the reliability of AI, which is that large language models are not kind of truth-seeking missiles. They are, they're probabilistically kind of predicting the next word. And so it matters kind of what is already out there on the internet because they're learning from what's out there on the internet. So I know that what a lot of people, certainly in the UK, have been playing around with this, trying to get it to do lesson plans, have found is that AI is very keen on learning styles. Learning styles don't exist, but often LLMs will mention learning styles or recommend using learning styles because the internet's full of them. So, that's one issue you've got if you're using AI to create learning lesson plans. And I recognise, yes, there are workarounds for these and you can train models in different ways and so on and so forth. But I do think that essential point about what these models, how they work and what it is that they generate, it does mean that completely eliminating hallucinations and errors is always going to be difficult. Robert, I take your point that teachers make errors too. And of course, we know that lots of teachers believe in learning styles as well. So yes, I take that. But I think I would say the solution to this, we have had methods of reliably reproducing quality sort of textual information for 500 years. It's called a textbook. And there does seem to be a thing both in the UK and the US where people are very wary of textbooks and seem to think that they are somehow something negative about them. Mm-hmm. But they have a lot of value. And where they particularly have value is in their ability to aggregate lots and lots of high quality examples. And we know that students learn through examples and they need lots of examples, not just one or two. And I think both in the UK and the US, there is a real issue with teachers being expected to create everything the night before. And my worry is that LLMs are just going to reinforce that, to say, oh, we can make it again. It goes back to the point I made earlier, is we're just trying to find ways of making our current working more efficient, rather than asking, is our current way of working really delivering value? There is nothing so actually as inefficient as doing efficiently something that isn't effective, right? So we need to be looking at what's really adding value.
Yeah, another question from the audience. It seems we still have a lot to learn about how to implement AI safely for children in a way that won't harm their intellectual development or mental health. Given that, is it irresponsible to fully unleash AI into classrooms right now? What do we think?
Well, I don't know. Well, I'll take a shot at this. I'm not sure anyone's saying fully unleash AI in the classrooms. I at least everything I've seen from state guidance that's come out from the departments of ed. I've seen U.S. Department of Ed guidance, even the way districts are. It seems in a very measured way, and I feel like folks are trying to figure out what does it look like to respond in a way to surface what are some of the risks and what are the downsides and mitigate that, pretty quickly. They get it right sometimes, they get it wrong other times, but there's a pretty strong commitment there. But I think generally speaking, this is up to, again, districts coming up with rules of the road for their communities, their classrooms about what's the appropriate way of using this and what's the inappropriate ways of using it. We're having a pretty good conversation as a society too about what responsible AI looks like. We have 2 good roadmaps from Congress right now, bipartisan ones. And so I think that's going to play out over time. So I worry about that. I know others do too, but I don't think anyone's saying let's just unleash this inside the classroom.
I just want to go a little deeper in one thing that I feel within the school is that the utility of the AI is directly correlated to the amount of information that the AI has about the kids. Because the more information it has about the kids, the better it can customize its teaching to the kids. And it was interesting when Armand was presenting, he presented as a feature like, hey, teachers can just add this and they don't even have to upload their roster. He said that because it's like, I'm not uploading my roster. I'm not uploading their demographic data, their test scores. But as an educator, part of me is like, I really want to upload my roster. I want to upload every single thing that I know about my kids so that your tool can give me better stuff that's tailored to them. And I think that is a tension point here. And another tool I've used is Panorama, which they already have a lot of data about our kids. And now they're building an AI tool so they can generate a lesson plan using data about our kids. And that data is fully secured through the Panorama platform. But a lot of these tools, we worry a lot about confidentiality, where if I upload an Excel spreadsheet about my kids and all their stuff, I don't really know where it's going. So just to close, there's just this tension between wanting to tell the AI everything about the kids so that it gives better stuff, but not wanting to divulge too much about our kids.
We're just about out of time, but I can't resist this last question. And the good news is it's a question asking about where this is going in the future when we all be either dead or in the home. I will be dead. You all will be in the home. If you think AI will make that big of a difference, quantify that difference, the questioner asks. What will NAEP or PISA scores look like in 20 years? Similar, a standard deviation different, or somewhere in between? What a great way to go out. Go ahead. Who wants to take a first crack at that? And just know that in 20 years, nobody's going to hold you accountable. So go wild.
So I'll go first, and that'll buy time for everyone else here. So I don't know. I feel trapped a little bit. Like I actually, and this is just because of some of the other work I get to do. Like I think AI is literally going to come up with cures to diseases, accelerate drug discovery. I think it's going to totally transform a bunch of different ways and radically improve healthcare outcomes. I think we're going to see it radically generate an enormous amount of economic productivity. I think it could do amazing things in education. My enthusiasm and optimism there reaches reality is that I think we just have a system in education that is very resistant to change. And so I think a lot of these capabilities could be amazing. Yes, maybe it cures some cancers and still not improve math grades. I don't think that's a fault of the technology. I think it's because we've crafted a system that, is prized mediocrity and just hasn't allowed some of the innovations that we sort of desperately need in the space. And so I don't know, that's where I'm an optimistic on the technology broadly. I'm almost a little bit more of a cynic of it in education. I don't want to be. And like the folks that make me more optimistic on it are Alex and Armand and just some of the teachers that I see at least trying to experiment with this and figure out where it can make a difference. But I want to be more optimistic there.
Armand and Daisy have not unmuted. They want nothing to do with this.
Did that buy you enough time? Do you want me to keep going?
Not enough time. Not enough time in the world. Go.
Robert, you started with a quote from me about how a lot of other technologies have transformed the world and not education. And yeah, my fear is there might be something similar this time. It just in terms of we've got to address the issue with the fundamental ideas about what learning is before we can start to use AI to improve the model and make the model more efficient. And unfortunately, I don't see enough efforts at doing that. So that's my concern.
I'm not going to let you off the hook here. Going to have to demand you answer.
I think about this in terms of like a distribution of outcomes that could potentially happen because I think there's a lot of uncertainty in this world, and I don't purport to kind of have a grasp about how these things might go, but might have some. I see two scenarios. I think one is a lot of this right now. The reason why we're having this webinar and all that stuff is like hype, right? Like I think that there's just like a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about AI, and so in any hype cycle, you have like a peak and then a trough. And so I think that is probably going to happen. I think the question for me is whether there is something at the end of that trough that is productive and AI actually enmeshes itself within the ed tech stack, within core instruction and those basic things. I think it's never going to meet that peak expectations, but I think it'll probably be in the middle. And so where I define peak expectations is like AI tutors. We don't need teachers, all the crazy stuff that, not crazy stuff, but just, all the things that I think we're hearing out there in the world. And so I think where we're going to net out in that like product, where AI is actually like implemented with productivity and things like that is I would fathom like a potentially like a range of like 5 to 15% improvements in test scores, but I think those are all just so enmeshed within assumptions that I can't really be held to. But I think that just quantifies the like expectation of like, we know what high quality teaching looks like. We're not going to transform the way students are educated. We're going to make it easier for educators to do some of the things we've been asking teachers to do, but they have their tote bag of good intentions, and there's just too many things in that bag that they're being asked to do right now. And hopefully we can carry some of those things for them. So I think that's where I net out.
I'm going to give Alex Barron the last word as our frontline educator, but I'll give my own answer, which is, for 20 years before I was in education, I was in the world of journalism, and a point that I've made several times in recent years is there's never been today a better time to be a well-informed news consumer, because you just have access to all manner of information. The caveat is you got to do the work yourself. The gatekeepers are just not as effective or interested as they used to be. My gut call, and I have the least experience with education technology of all of us, my gut call is we're going to see a similar phenomenon in education, that this will lead to a golden age if you are motivated, if you are curious, if you have the discernment to use these tools well, if, to your point, Daisy, you're not substituting Google for actually knowing things. That would be my best guess. But Alex, you get the last word.
Robert, that is actually exactly what I was going to say. And to be specific, I was a preschool teacher, I was a fourth grade teacher, and I taught high school math, and I've taught college. And when I taught high school math, I thought that my job was to teach kids high school math and teach them the skills of high school math. And the thing that I realized was the most core part of my job was to convince the kids that, one, they could actually do math, which they didn't believe they could do, and two, that it might matter to them and be good for them. And once I'd convinced them of those things, once that mindset shift had been effectuated, the learning of the math was the easy part. The motivational part is the whole piece. And so what this makes me wonder is if we can somehow as a country reform our national ethos about education as something that doesn't matter, something that's unserious in our country, and treat it the way some other countries treat it. I don't know what NAEP scores are going to look like in 20 years, but I'm very curious about what Vietnamese scores will look like in 20 years, or countries where education and learning are deeply valued. And if kids who are super motivated are going to learn a lot more. And I just close by saying, if we can find a way to really take education as a field seriously and motivate kids to want to learn, then I think there's real potential for some of these tools to make a big difference. And that's my closing optimistic take.
Terrific. Alex Barron, thank you very much. Thank you, John Bailey, Daisy Christodoulou, Armand Jaffer, and thanks to all of us who took part in this conversation. We will see you next month.